Partzufim. The teaching of the Partzufim is not merely a doctrine to be learned with the intellect, but a living language to be intuited through the soul. Each Partzuf, as taught by the Ari, is a complete world of being, a self-contained persona of divine light and will, clothed in specific garments, having a name, a structure, and an interior life, and each exits in relationship to the others in a cosmic order that is dynamic and relational. The Partzufim are the hidden architecture of the divine, the way in which the infinite reveals itself through particular forms of relationship so that the unbounded light may be received by creation without overwhelming it. This is the work of Tzimtzum, the contraction, which is not simply a spatial or temporal process, but the very making possible of relationship. In the contraction, the infinite withdrew a measure of its light to allow a space in which the finite could stand in relation to it. Yet this contraction gave rise to a rupture, the Shevirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels, in which the pure light could not be contained by the forms that were created to receive it. The shattering scattered sparks of light throughout the realms, embedding within creation the divine presence in hidden form, awaiting the process of Tikkun, rectification, which is the restoration of harmony to all the Partzufim. The Partzufim themselves are the structure of this Tikkun. They are not simply arrangements of sefirot, but living, conscious configurations that integrate the 10 sefirot into a single face of divine expression. Their role is to receive the scattered light, to reorganize it within the harmony of relationship, and to transmit it in a way that is both unified and differentiated, giving life to creation. The Ari teaches that the cosmos exists through the life of the Partzufim, and that each soul is called to enter into that life through contemplative attunement. Among the principal Partzufim, Arich Anpin, the long face, is the highest, the supreme principle of divine will, clothed in infinite patience and compassion, Rachamim. Arich Anpin is the hidden source, the infinite dimension of God that lies beyond all form and measurement, yet which gives birth to form. From Arich Anpin flow all other Partzufim, and it is in its face that the mystery of divine endurance and hidden giving is expressed. Abba and Imma, the father and mother, stand together as the intellectual superstructure of creation. Abba is the Sefer of Chokmah, the initial flash of creative insight, pure wisdom without definition, the primal seed of all being. Imma is Bina, understanding, the womb in which the seed is given form, the matrix of conception where thought becomes a living pattern. Together they are the inner dialogue of God, the root of all emanation, the primal conversation that brings creation into being. Zeir Anpin, the small face, is the living configuration of the 6 emotive sefirot, the 6 attributes of divine measure. It is the realm of relationship, balance, and mediation. Zeir Anpin stands as the dynamic face that receives the hidden light from above and translates it into the harmonized flow of life, bridging the intellectual worlds of Abba and Imma with the receptive world of Nukva. Nukva, the feminine, is the Shekinah, the final garment of divine presence, the vessel that receives the flow of divine light and manifests it within the worlds. Nukva is both the goal and the means of rectification, the space where divine giving and human reception meet, the dwelling place of Tikkun. The Shekinah gathers the scattered sparks and, through the harmonization of the Partzufim, returns them to their source, fulfilling the great work of restoration. The Ari teaches that the Partzufim are not fixed forms, but living, breathing realities, in constant movement and exchange. They enfold one another, reflect one another, and together form the living face of God. This is the hidden drama of creation, a continual interplay of giving and receiving, reflection and return. To know the Partzufim is to enter into this living drama, to participate consciously in the cosmic work of Tikkun. The study of the Partzufim is therefore not purely intellectual but initiatory. It requires a discipline of meditation and inner work, a path of aligning one's soul with the order of the divine faces. The Ari gives this path in stages. The first stage is study, to know the structure, names, and garments of the Partzufim. This requires deep learning and reverent contemplation, for the Partzufim are the hidden grammar of the divine language. The second stage is contemplation, to dwell within a single Partzuf, to meditate upon its form, to breathe its life, to attune the soul to its vibration. This is not a passive knowing but an entering into presence, a living attunement that transforms the consciousness of the meditator. The third stage is synthesis, to meditate upon the relationships of the Partzufim, to see how they unfold and reflect one another, to understand the living order of the divine economy. This stage brings the meditator to the heart of the Lurianic teaching, that the unity of creation is found in the harmony of the faces of God. The fourth stage is transformation, to become in one's own soul a living Partzuf, a face of divine presence. This is the highest work of Kabbalah, the work of sanctifying the self so that it becomes a vessel of divine harmony, a dwelling place of the living God. The Ari teaches that this work of transformation is the essence of the Tikkun of creation. The scattered sparks of the Shevirat are gathered not only in the worlds, but within the soul. The rectification of the soul is the rectification of the Partzufim. To harmonize the faces within is to harmonize the worlds without. Therefore, the meditation upon the Partzufim is the most profound of spiritual practices. It is not an exercise of the intellect alone, but a path of initiation, a way of entering into the inner life of God. To meditate upon a Partzuf is to walk the path of ascent, to climb the inner ladder of the soul until one stands within the living presence of the divine countenance. In the practical discipline of the Ari, the meditator begins with the study of the Partzufim as they are taught in the Zohar and in Lurianic writings. This study is not a mere accumulation of knowledge but the preparation of the soul. The mind learns the structure, the names, and the garments, and the heart begins to feel their living presence. The next step is the actual meditation. The meditator focuses upon a single Partzuf, visualizing its form, reciting its secret name, and entering into its life through breath and concentration. This is the living discipline of Kabbalah, the way in which knowledge becomes presence. The meditation deepens by moving to the contemplation of the interrelations of the Partzufim, perceiving the living network of light and will that binds them together. This is the stage of synthesis, where the meditator learns to dwell in the harmony of the divine faces. The final stage is the unification of the meditator with the Partzufim, the becoming of the self as a living face of God. This is the ultimate goal of the Lurianic path, the entrance into the heart of creation, the participation in the eternal Tikkun of all things. Thus the teaching of the Partzufim according to the Ari is both doctrine and path. It is a map of the inner architecture of the divine, a psychology of the soul, and a living practice of ascent. To know the Partzufim is to know the hidden life of God. To meditate upon them is to enter into that life, and to become one with them is the fulfillment of creation. The Ari reveals that the Partzufim are not distant realities, but living presences, faces of God that we may know and dwell within. They are the language of creation, the structure of divine relationship, and the secret of Tikkun. To walk the path of the Partzufim is to walk the path of the soul, and the path of the soul is the path of returning to the living countenance of God, the restoration of all things to the harmony of the infinite, and the fulfillment of the divine will. The Partzufim are not static forms of knowledge, nor are they abstract metaphysical concepts to be grasped solely by intellect. They are living presences, each with its own inner life, each a unique articulation of divine will. The Ari teaches that they are faces of God, Panim, and each face is an entire world. To enter into knowledge of them is to enter into a living world, to become an active participant in the cosmic drama of giving and receiving, of contraction and revelation, of concealment and restoration. The unfolding of the Partzufim is a movement of divine intimacy. They rise not by accident, but through the necessity of relationship. For God, in becoming manifest, must enter into dialogue with himself. This dialogue takes the form of the Partzufim, each one a self-contained persona that reflects, contains, and transmits divine light in a way suited to the needs of creation. Arich Anpin speaks the eternal word of will. Abba and Imma speak the language of wisdom and understanding. Zeir Anpin translates that language into the harmonies of emotive life. Nukva receives and manifests that harmony in the world. Together they form the living face of the divine, the matrix of all being. The Ari teaches that the Partzufim are not fixed in isolation, but are interrelated as a single living body. They are like organs within a greater being, each necessary for the life of the whole. The relationships between them are the true movement of creation. Within the divine life there is a constant circulation, giving and receiving, emanation and return, concealment and revelation. This is the language of the Partzufim. It is the language of the soul. The study of the Partzufim, therefore, is not a purely academic exercise. It is a path of initiation, a living discipline of the soul. The Kabbalist who seeks to know them must enter into their living form, must learn to perceive them not only with the mind, but with the heart and the spirit. This is the work of Tikkun, the rectification of the soul and of the world. To know the Partzufim is to participate in the healing of creation. The Ari gives the structure of this path in clear stages. The first stage is the stage of knowledge. The seeker learns the names, structures, and garments of the Partzufim. This is a stage of deep study and contemplation. The Kabbalist must dwell within the world of the Partzufim in thought and in prayer, learning their forms and listening to their voices. The second stage is the stage of dwelling. Here the seeker meditates upon a Partzuf, entering into its life. This is not an abstract meditation, but a living encounter. One must learn to breathe its name, to see its form in the imagination, to feel its inner life. This stage requires purity of intention, for the Partzufim are revealed only to those who prepare themselves to receive them. The third stage is the stage of synthesis. The seeker moves beyond the contemplation of single Partzufim to perceive their relationships. One meditates upon the harmony of the faces of God, seeing how they unfold and reflect one another. This is a stage of integration. The Kabbalist learns that the unity of creation is found in the harmony of the Partzufim, and that this harmony is the living form of divine will. The fourth stage is the stage of transformation. Here the seeker becomes a living Partzuf. This is the highest goal of the path. It is the entrance into the inner life of God, the full participation in the Tikkun of creation. The Kabbalist becomes a vessel of divine harmony, a dwelling place for the living God. This is the work of Kabbalah, to transform the self, to sanctify the soul, to enter into the life of the Partzufim. It is a work of devotion, discipline, and love. The Ari teaches that the rectification of the soul is the rectification of creation. The scattered sparks of the Shevirat are gathered not only in the worlds but in the soul. To gather those sparks is the work of the true Kabbalist. The practical discipline of the Ari begins with study and prayer. The seeker studies the Zohar, Lurianic writings, and the teachings of the Ari on the Partzufim. This study is accompanied by prayer and intention, for knowledge without intention is empty. The Kabbalist must prepare the soul to receive the living presence of the Partzufim. Meditation is the central practice. The seeker begins with a single Partzuf, focusing the mind, heart, and breath upon its form. One visualizes the Partzuf, recites its secret name, and enters into its life. This is not an intellectual exercise, but a living encounter. The meditation deepens through sustained practice, leading the seeker into the living presence of the Partzuf. As the meditator advances, one moves to the stage of synthesis. This involves contemplating the interplay of the Partzufim, seeing them as a living whole. It is the practice of attuning oneself to the harmony of divine relationship. Here the meditator begins to dwell not only in the face of a single Partzuf, but in the face of the living God. The final stage is the unification of the self with the Partzufim. This is the highest work of the Kabbalist. It is the entrance into the heart of creation, the participation in the eternal Tikkun. The soul becomes a living Partzuf, a face of God in the world. This is the fulfillment of the purpose of creation, the return of all things to harmony and wholeness. The Partzufim teach us that God is not a distant monad, but a living communion. They reveal that the divine life is a dynamic relationship, a continual giving and receiving, a constant movement of love and return. The face of God is not fixed, but lives in relationship. The work of the soul is to enter into that relationship, to become a living face of the divine, and to participate in the great Tikkun of creation. The Ari's teaching on the Partzufim thus offers both a profound doctrine and a living path. It is the hidden structure of reality, the language of divine intimacy, and the map of the soul's ascent. To meditate upon the Partzufim is to enter into the mystery of God. To live in their harmony is to live in the heart of creation. Therefore, the study and meditation of the Partzufim is the greatest of spiritual disciplines. It is a path of transformation, the art of returning the soul to its source. The Ari reveals that the Partzufim are not remote or abstract, but living realities that we may know and dwell within. They are the faces of God, the secret of creation, and the living heart of the Kabbalistic path. To walk this path is to undertake the greatest of initiations, to awaken the soul to the living presence of the divine, to gather the scattered sparks of being, and to become a dwelling place for the harmony of the Partzufim. It is to return creation to its eternal harmony and to bring the soul into the fullness of divine life. The path of the Partzufim is the path of the heart. It is the path of entering into relationship with the living God. It is the path of Tikkun. It is the path of becoming a face of the divine. The Ari teaches that this path is the ultimate work of Kabbalah. It is the great mystery of the soul and the secret of the worlds. Thus the Partzufim are not simply concepts to be studied, but living realities to be encountered. They are the structure of divine life, the faces of the infinite in relation to creation. To know them is to know the living God. To meditate upon them is to enter into the mystery of being. To become one with them is to fulfill the work of creation. The unfolding of the Partzufim, as taught by the Ari, is the most profound revelation of the inner life of God, for it discloses not only the structure of creation, but also the hidden manner in which divine will ends into being. They are the living archetypes of the divine self-manifestation, each a distinct face of the infinite light clothed in relationship, each embodying a mode of giving and receiving, of concealment and revelation. They are not abstractions of theology, but living presences, and the study of them is the art of entering into the living architecture of creation itself. The Kabbalist who contemplates them is learning the language in which reality is written, a language that is both geometrical and musical, a language of form and vibration. In this living language, each Partzuf is a word, each sephira a syllable, and the whole is the eternal utterance of God. The teaching begins with the understanding that creation is not a single act, but a continuous drama of relationship. The Partzufim are the faces through which the divine reality relates to itself and to all that is. They arise in the process of tzimtzum, the self-contraction of the infinite light, which makes possible the existence of the finite. In this withdrawal there is both concealment and the possibility of relationship. From the tzimtzum emerges the broken vessel, and from the broken vessel emerges the necessity of Tikkun. This Tikkun is the work of the Partzufim. They are the means by which the scattered sparks are gathered, the vessels repaired, and the harmony of creation restored. Arich Anpin, the long face, is the highest of the Partzufim, the hidden root of the divine will, clothed in infinite compassion. It is the dimension of endurance and patience in God, the eternal source from which flows all emanation. Abba, Father, is the sephira of Chakma, the primal wisdom, the initial flash of creative insight. Imma, Mother, is Bina, understanding, the womb of conception where thought is given form. Together, they are the first face of relationship, the inner dialogue of the divine. Zeir Anpin, small face, is the harmonized face of the six emotive sefirot, the life of relationship itself, mediating between the higher worlds and Nukva, the Shekinah, the dwelling presence of God within creation. To know these faces is to know the living order of creation. They are not fixed, lifeless diagrams, but dynamic realities in constant motion. They unfold and reflect one another in a living exchange of light and will. This is the hidden drama of divine life, a movement of giving and receiving that sustains the worlds. The teaching of the Ari is that the unity of creation lies precisely in this dynamic harmony, and that the work of the soul is to enter into that harmony. The path to this knowledge is a path of initiation. The first stage is study, the careful learning of the structure, names, and garments of the Partzufim. This is not an intellectual exercise alone, but a preparation of the soul. The words of the Zohar, the writings of the Ari, the traditions of the sages, all become the living texts that prepare the seeker to receive the inner life of the Partzufim. The second stage is contemplation, dwelling within a single Partzuf. The meditator visualizes its form, breathes its name, and attunes the heart to its life. This stage is the discipline of presence. It requires purity of intention, humility, and devotion. The Partzuf reveals itself only to those who have prepared themselves to receive it. The third stage is synthesis, the contemplation of the relationships of the Partzufim. Here the meditator perceives the living web of light that binds them together. This stage leads to the realization that the unity of creation is the unity of the divine faces. The harmony of the Partzufim is the harmony of all being, and the meditation upon that harmony is the meditation upon the heart of God. The fourth stage is transformation, the becoming of the self as a living Partzuf. This is the highest goal of the path. To become a face of the divine is to participate fully in the Tikkun of creation. The Kabbalist becomes a vessel of divine harmony, a dwelling place of the living God. This transformation is the work of the soul, the sanctification of being, and the return of all creation to its source. The Partzufim are not distant abstractions, but living realities to be encountered in the heart. To meditate upon them is to walk the path of ascent. It is to climb the inner ladder of the soul until one stands within the living presence of the divine countenance. This ascent is not an escape from the world but a return to it in fullness. It is the entrance into the great work of Tikkun, the gathering of the sparks, and the restoration of the harmony of all things. The practical discipline of the Ari begins with study. The Kabbalist learns the structure of the Partzufim as they are revealed in the Zohar and the writings of the Ari. This study is accompanied by prayer, for the knowledge of the Partzufim is inseparable from devotion. Knowledge without prayer is lifeless. Prayer without knowledge is blind. Together they prepare the soul to receive the living presence of the divine faces. Meditation follows study. The seeker begins with a single partzuf, focusing on its form, name, and life. This is not an intellectual exercise but a living encounter. The meditation deepens with sustained practice until the soul dwells within the life of the partzuf. From here the path moves to the stage of synthesis, the contemplation of the harmony of the Partzufim. This is the practice of attuning the soul to the living order of creation. The final stage is the unification of the self with the Partzufim. This is the highest attainment of the Kabbalist. It is the entrance into the heart of creation, the participation in the eternal Tikkun. The soul becomes a living partzuf, a face of God in the world. This is the fulfillment of creation, the return of all things to harmony and wholeness. To meditate upon the Partzufim is to enter into the living language of creation. They are the faces of God, the structure of divine intimacy, and the secret of Tikkun. To know them is to know the hidden life of God. To live in their harmony is to live in the heart of creation. To become one with them is to fulfill the work of creation. The Ari teaches that this path is the greatest of initiations. It is the art of returning the soul to its source. It is the work of sanctification, the gathering of the scattered sparks, and the restoration of all things to their eternal harmony. The Partzufim are the living grammar of creation, the faces of the infinite that we may know and dwell within. The path of the Partzufim is the path of the heart. It is the path of relationship. It is the path of Tikkun. To walk this path is to awaken the soul to the living presence of the divine, to gather the scattered sparks, and to become a dwelling place for the harmony of the faces of God. Thus the teaching of the Ari on the Partzufim is both doctrine and practice. It is the secret of creation and the map of the soul's ascent. It is the living architecture of the divine, the structure of relationship, and the way of return. To know it is to know the heart of Kabbalah. To live it is to enter into the life of God. To become it is to fulfill the purpose of creation. In this way, the study and meditation of the Partzufim is the greatest discipline of the soul. It is a living science and a sacred art. It is the work of the heart and the mind, the ascent of the soul, and the return to the divine presence. It is the living path of Tikkun, the work of restoration, and the fulfillment of all things. The Partzufim, in their living harmony, are the final teaching of the Ari, that creation is not a one-time event, but an eternal dance of relationship, and that the work of the soul is to enter into that dance. To meditate upon the Partzufim is to join that divine dance, to become part of the living harmony, and to walk the path of Tikkun until all creation rests within the fullness of the divine countenance. The initiatory practice of the Partzufim according to the Ari begins with preparation, which is itself an act of sanctification. Before entering meditation, the soul must be purified, the mind quieted, and the heart opened. This is done through prayer, fasting, and the recitation of psalms. The Ari insists upon purification because the Partzufim are not simply forms to be contemplated but living presences to be encountered. They reveal themselves only to a vessel prepared to receive them. The first stage of practice is the study of the form of each partzuf. This study is not intellectual alone but an inner learning, a training of the imagination to see with the eyes of the soul. The meditator learns the names, garments, limbs, and inner lights of each partzuf, dwelling upon the meditations offered in the writings of the Ari and the Zohar. This is done with the understanding that every detail is a symbol of an inner reality. The garments of the Partzufim are not simply external clothing, but the forms of divine speech, the ways in which infinite light takes form for the sake of creation. The second stage is visualization. The meditator seats themselves in quietude and begins with deep breathing, aligning the body with the rhythm of prayer. They then call forth the image of a particular partzuf, beginning with Arich Anpin, the long face. This partzuf is meditated upon as the root of patience and enduring woe, the eternal presence beyond all time. The meditator visualizes its face, garments, and crown, dwelling upon its name and contemplating the meaning of its life. This is done with the deep awareness that to visualize a partzuf is to enter into its presence. and that the mind must be still enough to become a vessel for that light. From Arich Anpin, the meditator proceeds to Abba and Imma, meditating upon their dialogue, their embrace, and the flow of Chokmah and Bina. Abba is meditated upon as the spark of divine wisdom, the seed of all creation. Imma is the womb of understanding, the place where thought takes form. Together they are the hidden face of the divine will, the source of all harmony. Their meditation is done in silence, in the quiet knowing that the soul is listening to the conversation at the heart of creation. Zeir Anpin, the small face, is next, and here the meditator dwells in the harmony of the 6 emotive sefirot. This is the Partzuf of relationship, the divine presence that clothes itself in the forms of mercy and judgment, strength and beauty. The meditation upon Zeir Anpin is a meditation upon balance, the soul learning to receive and to give, to harmonize judgment with compassion. The meditator visualizes the garments of Zeir Anpin, naming them, and breathing their life into their own being. Finally comes Nukva, the Shekinah, the bride, the dwelling presence of God in the world. The meditation upon Nukva is the meditation upon presence itself, the living manifestation of God within creation. This is the culmination of the practice, for to dwell with Nukva is to dwell in the heart of the world. The meditator offers prayer and song, aligning the breath with the life of the Shekinah, until the boundaries of self dissolve and the soul rests within the living face of God. The Ari instructs that these meditations are not isolated, but part of a living cycle. The practice is a daily ascent, the soul moving from the outer world into the hidden chambers of the divine. The meditator moves through the faces of the Partzufim as through rooms in a house, each revealing a deeper presence. This ascent is the art of returning, the path of Tikkun, the gathering of the scattered sparks. To enter into this practice is to enter into a sacred covenant. The soul agrees to walk the path of purification, study, and contemplation. It agrees to dwell in stillness and openness, to receive the living presence of the divine faces. The Ari teaches that this covenant is the heart of the Kabbalistic life, the living pact that opens the door to the inner life of God. In addition to the meditation upon individual Partzufim, the Ari prescribes practices for the contemplation of their relationships. This is the stage of synthesis, in which the meditator dwells upon the living harmony of the faces. They visualize Arich Anpin and Zeir Anpin as embracing, Abba and Imma as conversing, Nukva as receiving the life of all. This is the living geometry of the soul, the dance of divine presence that sustains all things. The meditator learns to dwell in this harmony until the boundaries of self dissolve, and the soul becomes a living face of God. The Ari also gives practices for using the Partzufim as gates of ascent. This involves the use of divine names, permutations of the letters of the Torah, and specific prayers drawn from the writings of the Zohar. These practices are not mere formulas, but living keys. They are the means by which the soul opens the inner gates and ascends into the presence of the Partzufim. The Ari teaches that each name is a vibration, a living articulation of divine will, and that the soul attunes itself to these vibrations through prayer, breath, and contemplation. The meditator begins each session with purification, physical cleanliness, fasting where appropriate, and the recitation of psalms and verses from the Zohar. They then focus upon a single Partzuf, entering into its life through visualization, naming, and contemplation. This practice is done with devotion and patience, for the Partzufim reveal themselves only to those who approach them with a pure heart and a quiet mind. The highest stage of the practice is the unification of the self with the Partzufim. This is not a matter of imagining but of becoming. The meditator, through sustained discipline, comes to dwell within the life of a Partzuf, their own being transformed into a living vessel of divine harmony. This is the goal of the path, not knowledge alone but the living experience of the divine presence. The Ari teaches that the path of the Partzufim is the path of Tikkun, the work of gathering the scattered sparks and restoring the harmony of creation. This is not only a mystical task, but an ethical one. To dwell in the life of the Partzufim is to become a force of harmony and restoration in the world. The meditator becomes a living covenant, a dwelling place for the divine presence, and a participant in the great work of creation. Thus, the practice of the Partzufim is both mystical and practical. It is a living science of ascent, a sacred art of relationship, and a path of transformation. It is the discipline of the heart and the mind, the art of dwelling in the living faces of God. The Ari concludes his teaching on the Partzufim with a vision of the soul's destiny, To know the Partzufim is to know the heart of creation. To dwell within them is to dwell in the heart of God. To become one with them is to fulfill the purpose of creation. This is the path of the Kabbalist, the path of return, the path of Tikkun, the path of the living covenant between the soul and the divine. The Ari's teaching on the Partzufim is not merely a doctrine but a living tradition, a map of the soul's ascent, and a guide for the work of the heart. It is the living science of the Kabbalist, the art of dwelling within the harmony of the faces of God, and the path of transformation that leads to the final Tikkun, the restoration of all things within the eternal presence. In this way, the Partzufim become not only objects of meditation but living realities, the very breath of creation. To meditate upon them is to breathe the life of God. To dwell within them is to dwell in the heart of creation. To become them is to fulfill the work of creation itself. The teaching of the Ari is a call to the soul, a call to return, to ascend, and to become a dwelling place for the living harmony of the Partzufim. This is the heart of Kabbalah, the secret of the divine life, and the path of the soul's ultimate transformation. The practice of the Partzufim is therefore the highest initiation, the living gate to the inner life of God. It is the path of purification, study, contemplation, synthesis, and transformation. It is the art of living within the harmony of the divine faces, the discipline of the heart, and the fulfillment of creation's purpose. Thus the Partzufim, in their living harmony, stand as the final teaching of the Ari, that creation is an eternal relationship, a divine drama of giving and receiving, and that the work of the soul is to enter into that relationship, to dwell within that harmony, and to become a living face of God. The soul who walks this path becomes not only a seeker, but a participant in the great work of Tikkun. They become a vessel of divine light, a dwelling place of the living God, and a face within the living harmony of creation. This is the final gift of the Ari, the knowledge of the Partzufim as both doctrine and living path, as map and destination, as the eternal covenant between God and the soul.